Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, welcome to this first plenary session where we are looking at the concept of multilateralism. The theme of the plenary session is unpacking multiculturalism. And of course, following on from this morning's discussions, we are all aware of the fact that we live in a somewhat tumultuous and chaotic time, and I think the discussion on multiculturalism is important today. Without going any further, our three speakers have been introduced, and each speaker will be given 20 minutes. I'd like us to keep the timing as tight as possible because I think this is a subject that is very, very important and it deserves careful consideration and a discussion at the end of it. So please, everyone's an expert in pigeonhole now. I'm sure you can start feeding me the questions, and we look forward to a robust discussion at the end of this. Just to start off with the idea that was introduced at the beginning of this morning's sessions, there is the objective political reality of multiculturalism as a thing, but I think what was raised earlier this morning is important. It's also the perception of multiculturalism and when and if multiculturalism is seen as a problem or a challenge or even in some instances a threat. I think that's when the problem arises. Now, to unpack this problematic, this issue, we have three very illustrious speakers. So without further ado, I would like to invite His Honorable Professor Dr Nasaruddin Umar, Minister of Religious Affairs. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I think last morning we enjoyed very good speech from President of Singapore. I myself really enjoy it because several statements very important of us. So allow me to explain to my experience as a Minister of Religious Affairs and Grand Imam of Masjid Istiqlal, Jakarta, the largest mosque in Southeast Asia, and the fourth after Mecca and Medina mosque. First of all, I would like to express our deepest appreciation to you, Mr. David Neo, Minister for Culture, Community and Youth, Singapore, and also, of course, Minister for Culture, Community and Youth, and Singapore, and Raja Ratan School of International Studies for welcoming me and my delegation with such as a warm reception. It is indeed an honor and pleasure for me to be part of this important meeting. My topic is this conference, From Pancasila to the Istiqlal Declarations, Unpacking Multiculturalism from Indonesia Experiences. Unpacking multiculturalism needs a deep and thick observation in order to reread and identify the best formula of management of multiculturalism. Yet, we have several best practices from New Zealand and Canada and the West, also this Asia in the East. Indonesia especially being considered as an exemplar and best practice of multiculturalism management. Pancasila has been regarded as a common platform of people and cultural diversity. It is for sure not without challenge and exception, but Indonesia has gone beyond the common platform. Instead, Indonesia has already discussed it and decided how to contribute to the world peace and offer solution for global affairs. This paper expresses Pancasila as the common ground and philosophy to approach pluralism and inclusivity. This paper also then offers how religious diplomacy how religious diplomacy would contribute to the world peace. Finally, this paper also will give examples and best practice from worship halls like Istiqlal Mosque to a fair solution of global affairs, especially issues of climate change and expressed in the Istiqlal Declaration of 2024. In doing so, this paper also gives a practice of how interfaith activism and local genius give a way to impact the multiculturalism. Pancasila as the common platform of diversity. While Indonesia independence was proclaimed August 17 and 1945, the success story of multiculturalism management in this country does not start from the Independence Day. It should be looked at more broadly long time ago to the archipelago as the common identification for the extremely diverse culture and people Southeast Asia. As the context narrows down of Indonesia, a historical background of people diversity in archipelago is a significant catalyst to understand the diversity and to establish awareness of multiculturalism. Indonesia is among the largest Muslim countries geographically. Flying from the very east to the west, making Indonesia has 3 time zones, incomparable to flying from London to Ankara, passing through many European countries. The largest sea zone that the land has established the so-called maritime culture, as it includes more than 70,000 islands and 13,000 ethnic groups and languages. You can imagine we have more than 3,000 local languages in Indonesia. The maritime culture, according to many sociologists and anthropologists, then create a typical more open, democratic and egalitarian society compared to the continental one. In terms of population among the 270 million people, Muslims constitute 275 million, or 87%, which is 13 of the world Muslim population, 1.9 billion. This has made Indonesia as the largest Muslim country in the world, followed by Pakistan, 212 million, India, 200 million, Bangladesh, and 150 million, Nigeria, 103 million, Egypt, 90 million, and so forth. And this is not overshadow other religious people, but this is huge number has profit that Muslim is significant to take into account when talking about Indonesia. Archipelago has been known as the home of subculture. However, the long history of any colonialism, such as the changing dominant religions group from Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam, and the modern colonialism by Portuguese, Dutch, Japan, and British administration has made Indonesian ever softer and receptive, even to the worst point of inferiority complex. However, the positive soft culture then contribute to the absence of massive conflict within this region for long time. How Indonesia has successfully managed such huge diversity while at the same time some modern countries have failed to maintain their unity? The answer is the ideology of Pancasila. Pancasila, the meaning is the five principles. And the great saying, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, unity in diversity, under the guidance of Pancasila, Indonesia has overcome many potential problems, always hunting this diversity multicultural society. There are several issues that might direct Indonesians into chaos. However, Pancasila, as the blended philosophy and common platform, has maintained and even enriched Indonesian diversity. Religion, including Islam, has become a point of political chaos and turbulence. The various Islamic groups have potential destructive force, as we could see in many Muslim countries. Indonesian Islam, however, has even become the uniting forces for the whole Indonesia. The strong and influential existence of Muslim mass organizations like Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah, as well as other associations. The state's service of religions through the Ministry of Religious Affairs, the Organization of Islamic Education, including Pesantren Islamic boarding school, very specific in Indonesia, and Islamic University. The Sunni and Shiite domination have established moderation to adjust dynamic change and challenge within Indonesian society. My current leadership in Ministry of Religious Affairs highly prioritizes a program called Curriculum Love. So this is very new of Indonesia, Curriculum Love. You know, what is the meaning of Curriculum Love? For my experience, a lot of religious teachers in Indonesia teach religion, not really teach regarding religion, but they teach about the heat and conflict connotations. You know, because every religion, of course, they have specific options. So this is. Let me explain what is the meaning of curriculum of love. Promoting national commitment, promoting religious tolerance and moderation in the school, and calls each citizen, regardless of its religion, to subject to the constitution of the country. That is Pancasila, official philosophical foundation of Indonesian state, comprising the 5 principles, including belief in the divinity of one and only God. The 1945 Constitution, or Undang-Undang Dasar 1945, and encourage United States of the Republic of Indonesia and Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, unity and diversity. Being religious or default or religion adherent mean being good citizen. Being good people is to subject to that a nation commitment or the obedience to the constitution of the country. Curriculum of love is not exclusively about being a pious or devout adherent of religion, but equally being a good people. In other words, paying respect and treating all citizens equally, no matter what religion and faith they decide to adhere. Teaching tolerance and avoiding hatred is the key to manage religious pluralism and diversity in Indonesia. Being tolerant does not mean believing that all religions promote identical theology and teachings. Every religion has its characteristic and fundamental teaching distinguish it from other religion. Tolerance means respecting others and allowing to freely perform their religion. It is the constitutional right of each citizen. And the third, another aspect of religious curriculum of love is nurturing and respecting local living tradition. Religious values are manifested in a living tradition. Religious tolerance and respecting others have been proven to be fundamentally contributing to making peaceful Indonesia, creating social and political stability amid the mega diversity Indonesia. Religious leaders, religious-based civil society organizations, religious-based education institutions have been playing fundamental role in providing access and good quality education in Indonesian children. No less than 25% of national education in Indonesia are run by religious-based. And allow me to explain a little bit regarding religious diplomacy. Let me jump up to the potential affair to the word peace. The heating conflict phenomena and humanitarian crisis in the last 2 decades in the homeland of Abrahamic religion have raised global concern to avoid the Third World War. Not to say the beginning, but considering the long-term war against terror, followed by the Arab Spring, and finally the armed conflict in Gaza involving Israel, Iran, Lebanon, and Yemen, and potentially the whole Middle East. These phenomena have left a concern that this is the failure of formal conventional diplomacy. War presents the failure of diplomacy. Once again, war represents the failure of diplomacy. It is very convincing. That has led many schools to argue that war, whatever it is the absolute failure of the international diplomacy, according to several scholars. Religious diplomacy or faith-based diplomacy can be considered as a subset of constitutional diplomacy that focus on the role of religion in international relation and the diplomatic effort aimed at engaging religious actors and addressing religious issues. Its conceptual background draws from various disciplines, including political science, international relations, theology, and religious studies. Conventional international relation theory of often overlooked religion as a significant factor in global affairs, focusing primarily on states and their interactions. However, scholars have increasingly recognized the influence of religion on international politics and global affairs. Constructive approaches highlight the role of ideas, norms, and identities, including religious ones, in shaping state behavior and global dynamics. Religious diplomacy acknowledges the influence of non-state actors, such as religious leaders, organizations, and movements, in international relations and global affairs. These actors often work across borders and play roles in peace building, conflict resolution, humanitarian aid, environmental crisis, and development. Faith leaders are seen as a key actor in diplomacy, easing dialogue, promoting peace, and building bridge between diverse groups. Understanding their motivation on the way out of climate change, networks, and interactions with state actors is crucial for effective religious diplomacy. Interfaith dialogue aims to promote understanding, tolerance, and cooperation among different religion communities. It is often involved engaging with other religions and promote mutual understanding and cooperation. It is a key component of religious diplomacy, facilitating communication and collaboration across religious divides. Interfaith interfaith initiative can address global challenge, promote shared values, and contribute to conflict resolution and reconciliation, and surely issues of environmental crisis. I myself emphasize that religious diplomacy reflects a recognition of the significance of religion in shaping global affairs and the significance of engaging religious elites or actors, as well as religious values, in diplomatic efforts to promote peace, stability, environmental sustainability, and collaboration in global context. To support religious diplomacy and awareness rebuilding of environmental crisis, Kalimatun Sawa, or meeting point of religion, must be discovered and identified. Meeting point of religion refer to areas where different religious traditions intersect, overlap, or share common ground. This meeting point can provide there. The last one, Istiqlal Declaration. You know, Istiqlal Mosque, we have very specific mosque. We just find 8 international award from the World Bank from Washington, D.C. Why? Because in Istiqlal Mosque, we have many distinctive mosques, like we have a tunnel of friendship. We have a special tunnel connecting between Istiqlal and Cathedral Church. And also we have joint parking, cathedral and mosque. And also we have interfaith painting in the tunnel. And also we have daily exercise with interfaith community in there. So I think very typical mosque. So why United Nations invite me as one of the person to in charge for the new mosque in Latin America last years. The effort of sustainability has reached the peak with the signing of Istiqlal Declaration by me, the Grand Imam, and the late Pope Francis on September 5, 2024. Yeah. The declaration is collaborative effort between religious leaders, highlighting the importance of working together to address global challenges and promote peace. The declaration was signed during an interreligious meeting in Jakarta, showing a commitment to fostering understanding and cooperation among different faiths. The Istiqlal Declaration, officially titled Fostering Religious Harmony for the Sake of Humanity, is a joint declaration addressing to a major global crisis, dehumanization, particularity of violence and conflict, and climate change, emphasizing the need for religious leaders to promote peace, respect, and environmental protection. The declaration highlights the urgent need to address the crisis of dehumanization, often worsened and exacerbated by the measure of religion and climate change, which threatens the well-being of humanity. It emphasizes the role of religion in promoting peace, interreligious dialogue, and respect for human dignity, urging religious leaders to foster understanding and cooperation. The declaration recognizes the importance of environmental stewardship and calls for decisive action to protect the natural world, acknowledging the impact of climate change on global harmony. The declaration underscores the inherent dignity of every human being, advocating for the protecting of vulnerable population like women, children, and elderly. So this is my conclusion. In conclusion, let us remember that our faith and our duty to the world, peace, and environment are inseparable. The worship house stand as become of hope, guidance us to act with wisdom, compassion, and courage. Together we can foster a culture stewardship, ensuring that we live a thriving, peaceful planet for future generations. As critical contents of community life and spiritual guidance, worship hosts have a pivotal role to play in addressing climate change by embracing their ethical responsibility, educating their congregates, engaging in community initiative, and adopting sustainable practice and collaborating with other faith communities. Worshippers can become powerful agents of change. In doing so, they fulfill their spiritual mandate while contributing to a healthier planet for future generations. The time of action is now, and the worship house can lead the way in fostering a culture of environmental stewardship with the community. Based on this deep concern, I myself address an urgent matter that intertwines our spiritual obligation with our responsibility to the earth, environmental issues, and the role of the mosque or worship house in this critical dialogue. As we move forward, let us embrace our role as a character of this earth. May our action reflect our values, and may we be a source of inspiration for others to join us in this essential mission. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nasaruddin. I would like to invite Colleen to perhaps, the floor is yours.
I'd like to thank the Rajaratnam School of International Studies and also the Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth for extending an invitation for me to join this conference, ICCS 2025. It is really a privilege to be here. Now, I come to this area with a background in cross-cultural psychology, and in particular research interest in cultures in contact. So in today's presentation, I would like to draw on international research on multiculturalism, which presents us with evidence-based suggestions for fostering social cohesion. And in the presentation, I'd like to address 3 points. First, I'd like to define multiculturalism because multiculturalism means different things to different people. Then I'd like to talk about multiculturalism as promoting a socially cohesive society. And then finally, I'd like to briefly touch on multiculturalism in an uncertain world. So starting off with defining multiculturalism, I would argue that cultural diversity is necessary, but it is not sufficient to define a multicultural society. Indeed, Africa has the most culturally and ethnically diverse cultures in the world, yet has not, but only to a limited degree, engaged in multiculturalism as a political system. But rather, for a society or a nation to be truly multicultural, we have 3 criteria that should be met. First of all, we look for multicultural contact. So we have culturally, linguistically, religiously diverse groups who are interacting and engaging with each other as opposed to leading separate and parallel lives. Secondly, we look for a multicultural ideology, which is a general valuing and appreciation of cultural and religious diversities. And then finally, we need multicultural policies and practices that support and accommodate this diversity. So viewed from this perspective, the goals of multiculturalism are ensuring cultural maintenance, maintenance of culture, identity, of language for all ethnocultural and religious groups, but at the same time ensuring they participate in an equitable way in the wider society. And when we achieve those goals, we also find we achieve social cohesion. Now, as a psychologist, I am particularly interested in the psychosocial elements of social cohesion, so you will hear me refer many times to belonging, trust, and an inclusion. So, how does multiculturalism, these three components, relate to social cohesion? First of all, multicultural contact. When diverse groups are engaging with each other, we know overall, generally speaking, positive outcomes result, which include things like reduction in prejudice and increases in empathy and intercultural trust. And also we find that groups that are engaging in this multicultural contact tend to have a stronger sense of national belonging and very frequently a common in-group identity. But to get the best results from multicultural contact, it's better if the contact occurs under optimal conditions so that the groups are engaging voluntarily, they're meeting in terms of equal status, they are working cooperatively, generally towards a mutually beneficial goal, and that the contact is endorsed by authorities. Now, authorities could be governmental authorities, but it could be in business organizations, it could be management, in educational institutions, it could be a professor in a classroom. So that contact under those conditions tend to produce the best results and the most reliable results. But it would be remiss of me to say sometimes there are negative examples of multicultural contact, although we know the research tells us that positive contact occurs more often than negative. But in the case of negative contact, risks to social cohesion result, in particular, a tendency to find greater stereotyping, higher levels of prejudice, and often a lack of willingness to engage across intergroup lines. Now, multicultural ideology. In general, in societies where diversity is valued, there are lower levels of prejudice and greater tolerance. There's more support for minority, ethnic, and cultural rights, and there's less perceived discrimination, both in majority groups and minority groups. If we look specifically at immigrant and minority groups, we find additionally that the presence of multicultural ideology is linked to a stronger sense of belonging and also higher levels of psychological and social well-being. Good news for ASEAN, a recent poll by the Pew Research Center found that the majority of respondents on their survey in Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia agreed that the presence of ethnic, cultural, and religious diversity made their country a better place to live. Finally, going beyond the content and the ideology, we have the issue of multicultural policies. The evidence for the outcomes of policies and practices for minority and immigrant groups is very clear. They have higher levels of trust, lower levels of perceived discrimination, stronger sense of belonging. They feel more integrated into their society, they have greater satisfaction with national government, and in addition to that, better psychological and social well-being. Now, the evidence for majority groups, or let's say members of a receiving society in relationship to immigrants, on one hand, we do have evidence that the policies enhance social cohesion because you find the attitudes towards immigrants are more positive, and majority group members are not only more satisfied with their government, but they have higher levels of life satisfaction. But on the other side, in many cases, majority groups feel threatened by multicultural policies. And particularly European studies have shown that majority groups feel less safe the more multicultural policies their country has. And they also report higher levels of perceived discrimination. Now, this brings us to a really important point, and that is the importance of all-inclusive multiculturalism, because it is very commonly the case that majority groups don't see multiculturalism as having anything to do with them. In fact, in New Zealand, I would say most New Zealand Europeans don't think they have a culture. It's only everybody else that has a culture. But of course, that's not correct. We all have cultures, languages, cultural identities. So it's important to understand that multiculturalism applies to everyone and can offer benefits to everyone. So promoting an all-inclusive vision of multiculturalism is in fact really important. Now, Singapore, I think, is a lovely case study in multicultural success because on the contact, the ideology, and the policy components of multiculturalism, Singapore has done extremely well. Contact is facilitated by the ethnic integration policy that President Tharman more eloquently explained than I can ever do. But essentially, we're talking about public housing in Singapore and how the housing estates mirror the demographic composition of Singapore proportionally. So you have the proportion of Chinese, Malays, Indians, and others in housing communities, and even in particular blocks within housing estates. In terms of ideology, World Gallup poll in 2019 showed that of 124 countries, Singapore came out top, describing their country as a very good place for ethnic tolerance and for minorities to live. And in terms of policies, the bilingual education policy has been extremely effective so that students are educated in English, which is the main language of intercultural communication, but they're also fluent in a mother tongue, retaining their ethnic language, cultures, and identities. And in doing this, Singapore is fostering both strong ethnic, religious identities along with national identity. And they celebrate and sustain diversity within or under the umbrella of a Singapore national identity. I love the phrase that came up in the previous session, gloriously hyphenated. And I think Singaporeans are, because you find they identify both with their ethnic group and their national Singapore identity. So I'm a Chinese Singaporean, or I'm a Singaporean Indian, and this is not common in the international arena to have a strong relationship between ethnic and national identity. Now, government has been very effective in Singapore in terms of leading the way for multiculturalism, but this isn't just a top-down phenomenon. To make multiculturalism work, you have to have top down and bottom up. And community organizations are really, really important to the success of multiculturalism. I understand in Singapore, many of you here come from some of these community organizations, and the few people I've met already, I've been quite inspired by what these organizations are doing in Singapore. Now, as an academic and a researcher, obviously, I'm going to say researchers are important to making multiculturalism work because we can offer evidence base for policy formulations and multicultural practices. Our own Center for Applied Cross-Cultural Research at Victoria University of Wellington, we have had the good fortune to work both with government and with community organizations. In particular, we have done a number of needs analyses. We worked, as an example, for our Ministry of Ethnic Communities, undertaking a needs analysis for Muslim youth in the country to hear their voices about what they believed they needed to thrive in New Zealand, to keep their identity as Muslim, but to also be comfortable and fit into New Zealand. So balancing ethnic religious cultures with national culture. We work with community organizations, particularly Multicultural New Zealand, again doing needs analysis both for the organization and for in various regions of the country where we've examined the needs of immigrants and former refugees. And when we produce our reports, the organizations share with government, both national and local, to institute real change to benefit newcomers to our country and increase social cohesion. Now, the media also has a role to play. And the media, and here I'm talking about mainstream media, not yet social media. Unfortunately, in New Zealand, they say, if it bleeds, it leads. So media often emphasizes more the negative aspects of ethnic relations rather than the positive. And we know from research in New Zealand, which I think is tragic, that the more Kiwis, New Zealanders, consume news, the more negative their attitudes are towards Muslims. Regrettably, in the West, we live in a somewhat Islamophobic world, and the media is perpetuating that. So I would really like to see media take a more positive approach to highlighting some of the successes of multiculturalism and positive stories about ethnic relations instead of focusing on ethnic tensions. Now, finally, multiculturalism in an uncertain world. Things are looking pretty bleak. Research across the globe is telling us that discrimination is rising, anti-immigration attitudes are growing, that due to ethnic and religious conflict, numbers of refugees and internally displaced people are increasing. Increases in hate speech and other hate crimes in North America, Australasia, and most of Europe, and growth in far-right nationalist parties and politics. It sounds pretty bleak. Why? Why? And I'm going to give you one perspective, and this is only one perspective, and I would say threats. We're living in an uncertain world full of existential threats. War and international conflict, prominent today. Climate change and increasing natural disasters, economic threats, trade wars, high inflation, market volatility, financial crisis, not looking good on the economic front. International pandemics, we've survived COVID, but when's the next one? And then misinformation and disinformation in the media. Now, I'm not going to tell you that threats, these kinds of existential, or we call ecological threats, are a direct cause of decreasing social cohesion. But what I am going to share with you are the findings from research that we have done going back to cultural and cross-cultural psychology on ecological and cultural factors that underlie the global distribution of prejudice. And what we find is when countries or societies are subjected to ecological threat, they tighten. cultural tightness increases. And what I mean by that is social norms are prescribed, and there is no tolerance, or little tolerance, and no tolerance for deviance from those norms. So while there are beneficial aspects of social regulation like this, culturally tight societies are less open to novelty or difference. So essentially what we find is that tight cultures are more prejudiced cultures. So here we have like a chain of events. We have modeled this across 25 countries, and we see these relationships. It's not to suggest that's the only way the relationships can go, because they can be bidirectional in some cases. But what we do find is this relationship between threat, tightness, and prejudice. And we've replicated this finding not only across 25 countries, but the research team has looked at this within the 50 states in the United States of America and found the same pattern. So I know that sounds like I'm ending on a pessimistic note. I brought up the issue of threat, and our next speaker is going to discuss that in more detail, and fortunately offer some suggestions about how we can address those threats. But I do think acknowledging the threats and their influence and impact on social cohesion does make bridges for us to go to days 2 and 3, which is about navigating uncertainty and forging social resilience. So my final comment is multiculturalism is more about the journey than the destination. There are no perfect multicultural societies, but we can be on the road to improving both multicultural nature of our countries and also enhancing social cohesion. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Colleen. I'd like to invite Ed to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you so much. Back here in Singapore, this is a country, as you've just heard from Colleen Ward, that knows a lot about the strength and resilience of multicultural societies. It exemplifies how, I think, diversity, when embraced and thoroughly managed, can be a source of sovereign strength. Now, today I want to build on some of the excellent points raised by President Farman, the President of Singapore, in his opening remarks. I want to talk to you about the role of trust in society and how perceptions and manifestations of trust impacts multiculturalism. I also want to touch on how business and the private sector, where levels of trust remain higher than in other institutions, can play an important role in strengthening social cohesion. So if I may, let's start with trust. I've spent my career, my 30-year career, at the intersection of media, business, and government. And in that time, I've come to understand that trust is the cornerstone of everything. It's the condition that enables collaboration, it supports differences, and it allows for progress to be shared, not just one. And in recent years, I've seen how an absence of trust negatively affects social cohesion. In my firm, Edelman, we've spent 25 years studying trust. The Edelman Trust Barometer, referenced by the President this morning, is the brainchild of our founder and owner, Richard Edelman. It began in 1999 in the wake of the Battle of Seattle, when anti-globalization protests literally erupted outside the WTO summit. That moment highlighted growing global frustration with institutions that the protesters felt were unaccountable, unapproachable, and uninterested in people's everyday lives. This was the first real pushback globalization and corporatization. And it was a warning in many ways for what was to come. Since then, the Trust Barometer, the world's most comprehensive study of trust in the institutions of business, government, media, and civil society, has measured how trust is affected before, during, and after the world's most significant systemic shocks and institutional failures. And we have had some, as you can see on this slide. The 2003 Iraq War, which severely damaged trust in Western governments. The 2008 financial crisis, which shattered faith in markets, the rules that govern them, and the ethics of business. Brexit in 2016, a UK phenomenon, yes, but in many ways patient zero in the global wave of populism that was to come. And in more recent years, the mainstreaming of populism, and elsewhere in the world, the strengthening of autocracy at the expense of democracy, is a product, in part, of people's distrust of our political leaders and their failure to deliver on their promises. You also see here, of course, COVID-19, which rewired our expectations, and where, with government faltering, business quickly emerged as a more trusted institution, in part because it acted in many countries with greater speed and clarity and competence. And finally, the dismantling of norms and conventions, whether that be the illegal invasions of countries like Russia's illegal invasion of the Ukraine, or the continued weakening of the multinational and multilateral system. And yet, this year, on the 25th anniversary of our study, we found something darker taking root. Not just distrust, but active grievance. So if you consider this, today, 61% of people globally hold grievances against business, government, and the elite. And by grievances, I mean an active feeling of resentment over something believed to be wrong or unfair. We note a majority agreeing with four statements. Business and government serves a select few. Business and government's actions hurts me. The system favors the rich, and the rich are getting richer. This sentiment is not confined to any one region. It's a global phenomenon. In 25 of the 26 countries we survey, the majority hold this sense of grievance. It's interesting that the outlier is here in Singapore, where just under half, 49%, express that sentiment. It's still, of course, a sizable proportion, but it does stand in contrast to the rest of the world, and it raises a question: could Singapore's deliberate approach to managing diversity, its long-standing emphasis on multiracial harmony and integration, be one of the factors helping to sustain a deeper level of institutional trust? No doubt there are other contributing factors, but in a global environment increasingly defined by division, there may well be lessons here that others would do well to study. Now, across most of the world, the sense of grievance is not only widespread, it's structurally embedded, by which I mean we see it not uniformly in the data. You see it particularly in different types of subgroups. But in some respects, this shouldn't be surprising given what we've also been seeing for some years now, which is a sense of trust inequality. This is the difference in perceptions of trust between those in high income and those in low income groups. It's now in double digits in 22 of the 28 markets we survey. As you'd expect, there are higher levels of grievance in the lower income groups. And you can see that quite clearly on this slide here. Now, more concerningly, a sense of grievance has led to 40% of people now saying they support hostile activism. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean online abuse, the deliberate spread of disinformation, and astonishingly, violence against property or people. And among Gen Z respondents, that number jumps to 53%. This isn't just cynicism. I think we are seeing a mindset shift, a belief that someone else's gain comes at my loss. that change is not something you can vote for, but something that you have to force. This is the collapse of the middle ground, if you like, and the unraveling of shared understanding in action. Now, compounding and contributing to this erosion of trust and emergence of grievance is the proliferation of disinformation, the poisoning of the information well, principally via social media platforms. Now, this has been an important theme from the Trust Barometer over the last quarter of a century, and something that we refer to as the battle for truth. The erosion of trust, the fragmentation of the media, and growing divisions within society have been both accelerated and exploited by those who see opportunity in chaos. At the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, where I serve as a board member, we've seen how bad actors systematically weaponize disinformation to fracture social cohesion, particularly along ethnic, religious, and political lines. These bad actors use sophisticated methods, but their goal is simple: deepen polarization through creating tensions and so-called wedge issues, pitting groups against each other. Now, disinformation isn't just noise. For them, it is a strategic tool. It feeds grievances, amplifies fears, and is designed to undermine the legitimacy of institutions. We saw it during the pandemic, did we not, when online content about masks, vaccines, and lockdowns collided with pre-existing mistrust in government and science. And in many countries, this disinformation wasn't just harmful, it was fatal. If you think about Brazil and parts of the US, and it's left a lasting scar, a public less willing to believe official sources, less inclined to trust science or experts, and more drawn to conspiracy. In many countries, we see evidence of a growing problem of individuals viewing opposing ideas not just as different, but as threats to their identity and their values. In many places, the results of declining institutional trust and proliferation of dis and misinformation has led to a breakdown not just in belief, but in the concept of knowable truth. The moment we start negotiating with untruths, we abandon the foundations of shared reality. But to understand how we arrived here, we must also understand how disinformation spreads. In previous generations, as the President of Singapore referenced this morning, information was absorbed communally around dinner tables, in places of worship, in offices, in classrooms, in public spaces. Belief was tempered by conversation and challenged by proximity to difference. Today, however, social disconnectedness is accelerating a kind of willful isolation, not just physical, but cognitive. People are no longer consuming information in their wider community. They're consuming it on their own, in a solitary environment, through algorithmic social media tunnels and tribal channels, where emotion often replaces evidence and reinforcement replaces reflection. And in that solitude, untruths gain strength. What once might have been softened by shared scrutiny is now strengthened in private conviction, if you like. In this way, isolation isn't just a backdrop to disinformation. It is one of the new demand-side factors in the effectiveness of supply-side disinformation. And when we take the theme of today's conference, multiculturalism, the interplay between isolation and disinformation erodes the trust that is essential for multicultural societies to thrive. As individuals retreat into isolated online information bubbles, the shared understanding that underpins social cohesion diminishes and social resilience erodes. This would, I argue, make societies a lot more susceptible to division and to conflict. Now, multiculturalism, at its best, is a source of strength. I've lived in London since the early 1990s, and I've seen how London's stature as a great global city, is burnished by its diversity. Societies enriched by diverse identity, languages, faiths tend to be more creative, more economically dynamic, and more globally connected. But that strength is conditional. It rests on a foundation of mutual trust. And herein lies the paradox. Multiculturalism requires trust to flourish. But in today's environment, when trust is in short supply and disinformation runs unchecked, it is not multiculturalism itself that falters, but the willingness to uphold and embrace it. What we see today is a reinforcing doom loop where trust breaks down, disinformation takes root, and where disinformation spreads, it further erodes trust. And in that cycle, multicultural cohesion is amongst the most at-risk foundations of society. In their recent work on online extremism in Southeast Asia, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue documented coordinated attempts to frame interfaith tensions as existential threats. In Europe and in North America, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are increasingly used as tools of political mobilization. This is a global pattern. The goal is always the same: to erode cohesion by replacing curiosity with fear. And imagine, as the President said, when all of that meets AI. Now, in the UK, my own country, the Wolf Institute's diversity study revealed a telling contradiction. While 70% of respondents believed ethnic diversity had benefited society, only 41% said the same of religious diversity. Now, I do want to make the point that liberal democracies must reckon with the reality that their own complacency has helped erode the foundations of multiculturalism. For too long, governments failed to take seriously the legitimate concerns of citizens about the pace and uneven impact of immigration. The perceived disconnect between public sentiment and official policy has bred resentment, fueling the rise of nationalist politics that frame diversity as a threat rather than a strength. This is particularly true in Europe. And in this context, trust must be rebuilt not just between communities, but within the institutional scaffolding that supports those communities in schools, in businesses, in the media, and yes, particularly online. Multicultural societies require deliberate upkeep, as you've heard. They do not function on sentiment alone. They need systems that reward inclusion, platforms that promote shared narratives, and institutions that refuse to let division become normalized. Now, in the world of eroding trust and rising division, business has emerged as an unexpected beacon of reliability, or to put it less charitably, it's just more trusted than other institutions. Our 2025 Trust Barometer indicated that 62% of people globally trust business to do what is right, surpassing trust in government, media, and NGOs. This trust, though, places a significant responsibility on business leaders. Beyond delivering profits, they are now expected to provide fair and equitable employment opportunities, invest in upskilling and reskilling initiatives to prepare workers for the future, and foster inclusive workplaces that reflect the diversity of communities they serve. Moreover, 75% of respondents believe that CEOs should take the lead on societal issues where government failed to act. This expectation underscores the evolving role of businesses as not just economic entities, but as key players in shaping societal values and cohesion. Business cannot replace the state, nor should it, but it can and must be a co-architect of the future, not least because it has some of the answers, but it also has the ability to convene, to scale, and to build public trust, giving it a unique role in stitching our social fabric back together at a time when the fabric risks coming apart at the seams. It is, after all, where business is where most of us spend a lot of our time. And by embracing this role, business can serve as a bridge between divided communities, modeling inclusive practices and championing initiatives that promote unity and understanding. But addressing the challenges of trust erosion and societal division requires concerted effort. To round up my remarks, here are what I think are 4 of the key imperatives in that effort. Number 1, institutionalize equity. Inclusion must go beyond rhetoric. We can hardwire it in. It should be embedded in policies, practices, organizational cultures, ensuring that all individuals feel valued and represented. I thought Colleen Ward's points here were excellent. Secondly, championing truth. Combating disinformation necessitates a commitment to transparency, media literacy, and open dialogue. Institutions must actively counter false narratives and promote factual information. We also have to better understand the demand side of the equation. Why are people susceptible to conspiracy content? Why do they consume and share it? Number 3, foster intercultural engagement. Encouraging interactions between diverse communities can break down stereotypes and build mutual respect. Initiatives like interfaith dialogues, cultural exchange programs, and community events and efforts can and will play a pivotal role. Programs led by organisations like the King's Trust in the UK work incredibly well. Point 4, institutionalised partnerships. No single actor can solve a crisis of this magnitude alone. Institutions must partner together, collaboratively, not competitively. This is not a moment for institutional posturing, it's a moment for collective action. Government, with business and civil society and a media sector that champions truthfulness, are critical as we move forward. Now, in closing, it's essential to recognise that multicultural societies, when nurtured with trust and mutual respect, amongst the most vibrant and resilient. They offer a tapestry, or quilt if you like, of experiences, ideas and innovations that enrich our collective human experience. They deliver new ideas and talent that drives economic growth, which itself generates peace and stability. But maintaining cohesion in multicultural societies is not guaranteed. It demands vigilance, courage, and constant effort. Trust does not regenerate on its own. It's rebuilt through consistent action, through meaningful engagement, and through a shared commitment to the common good. As leaders, policymakers, and citizens, we must treat this work not as optional, but as essential. This is a moment that demands more than observation. It calls for action, moving from grievance to respect, from polarization to unity. The future we need is one where everyone, regardless of their background, faith, or identity, can recognize themselves not just as participants in society, but as vital to its success. That future is within our reach, but only if we choose to build it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ed. Ladies and gentlemen, in a sense, my duty today is also to be the station master to make sure that the trains run on time, and we have exactly 4 minutes before we end. Now, the problem with having 4 minutes is that it is humanly impossible for me to actually pose questions to the members of our panel and to get replies, but I think it's only fair that I try to at least mention the questions, read out some of the questions. The questions come, I notice, I have a lot of questions here, but they tend to be clustered around 2 general themes. One has to do with this idea of how do we read the success of multiculturalism? Aaron asked the question, Cheng asked the question, when do we know that multiculturalism is flourishing? Because there's been a lot of talk today about the decline of support, the lack of enthusiasm, multiculturalism in crisis. Well, what are the signs? And I think this is important for us to bear in mind. However, there are also a lot of questions that actually touch on what has been said today and just now, and also in the sessions earlier. And I think that reflects the perception among many people here that we've been talking a lot about multiculturalism as somehow the responsibility of the state. Several people have asked, who's responsible? Who does this? Who's managing it? And why is there this tendency to assume that multiculturalism is a top-down process? And I think this is important because there is an unstated assumption that somehow multiculturalism has become the concern of states, and it's the duty of the state to somehow get things right, to make people happy. But there's an old joke in political science. You can imagine even the most benevolent state really caring for the welfare of its people, but in a sense being maximalist about it. Now, fun is only fun when it's spontaneous. But if you have a benevolent state that says to everyone, on Saturday from 12 to 3, you will have fun, that somehow kills the fun, right? So several people have asked, what about gender? What about religious diversity, the role of religious scripture and religious praxis? And I think this is important, particularly for those who are from the background of political science, because we have this tendency to privilege the Westphalian nation state as the primary actor in politics. Whereas I think in the earlier panel, it was mentioned, right, when states do things, they become bureaucratized very fast. And it surely, learning to live with and accepting alterity and difference cannot be solely the prerogative of the state. State cannot make you liberal. No state, doesn't matter how powerful a state is, can legislate a law compelling you to love your neighbor. That's not going to happen. So who are the other actors? And I think these are questions that were raised by some people. Krisa, Aaron, Sharon asked the question about gender. Where's gender in this? Muhammad asked the question about religious scripture and praxis. I wish we had time, but as station master, I'm staring at the clock. We literally have 2 minutes. So if someone is about to perform the great sacrifice, someone can actually attempt to address some of this in 1 minute exactly. 1 minute.
I mean, I'll have a quick 20-second go at what are the signs when you know it's working. I think institutional trust. I've talked a lot about distrust in institutions, in government, business, media, civil society. If you see that going in a positive direction, I think that is a sign. I think a sign would be around political stability, a rejection in online hate speech. And I think in some countries, actually economic performance as well. I certainly see in countries that have demographic challenges, immigration is critical to grow the economy, to grow the pie. So I think those are probably some of the things that I would point to. There'll be many others.
Colleen?
I don't think it's just the responsibility of the government, although I would like to see the government responsive to community groups and NGOs, and indeed researchers who can provide information that would help multiculturalism flourish and social cohesion to be enhanced. But the people, it doesn't have to be even a formal organization. It's like people power. I think about some years ago in New Zealand when there was a desecration of Jewish graves. The population came out and marched on Parliament.
Absolutely.
And what happened as an outcome is the government developed a diversity action program. So people can make statements, and if government is responsive to what the people are saying, that can help. That can help a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just your question very, very fundamental of me. Let me remember what Max Weber mentioned in very famous books. Impossible to change your culture without which you change your logos, and impossible to change the logos without to change the theology. So this is my point here. We have to change our theological perspective. Our theology is too masculine, so we need to move to feminine theology today. This is my perspective. God, modern, feminine God, not masculine God. And all the holy book, modern, feminine books. And all the prophet, modern, feminine prophet. But our question, why do people offer masculine? So we have to change our theological perspective from masculine theology to feminine theology. Thank you.